Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, listeners. This is the Sorceress Cagliastro, and this is Dark Matters, a show where we take an opportunity to talk about those aspects of sorcery and matters that are involved with demons and the disincarnate and all of this sort of thing in a way that perhaps you have not heard on other shows. The position that I come from is one of the science of sorcery. We are a show where my position is that I am not involved in divinities or deities of any kind, but however, we are wide open to discussion about the subjects at hand. Tonight I'm on the air with my co-host, Chris Rogue Ostrowski, who I met probably less than a year ago, and after 3 or 4 conversations knew he was the one. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
Tonight we're also on the air with Morgan St. Knight. And Morgan, I would like to acknowledge you and thank you for coming onto the show and being part of it. I think that your contributions will be tremendous. And we're going to take... Yeah. Oh, of course. We're going to take tonight to get to know each other on the air. I mean, we already know each other, but to get used to each other and chat a bit. And Morgan is an author who has a book out that you can find on my site and on his. And one should take a look and get that book. And Morgan, feel free to talk about that after the intro or at some point at the end when we talk about how to reach us. And tonight we have on with us Victor the Voice Furman. Hello, Victor. How are you tonight?
Good evening, Sorceress. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We are doing a show at 11 o'clock tonight, as you can tell, and I don't know if we're going to get a half hour or an hour out of this because we are not on prime time for this one episode on Blog Talk Radio, and it can be quirky. So we don't exactly know how that's going to go. We're going to plan on an hour and see how it rolls out and give Morgan an opportunity to get used to the timing and to get used to the comfortability of being on the air. And Morgan, I want to ask you, is there anything that you want to say as a sort of self-introduction?
Well, yeah, I would like to just give people a brief idea of who I am. Basically, I've worked with a lot of paths over about 40 years, and now I am pretty much, I'd say, a freelance agent. And what I mean by that is I do what works for me. I'm results-oriented, and I'm willing to take from other traditions, but I like to derobe it of a lot of the elaborate ritual, and that I usually try to go for what actually gets right to the point as far as achieving results. So if someone were to ask me, well, are you a witch? Are you a sorcerer? Are you a brujo? What are you? I would just have to say that I'm me, and I will take whatever means I need to get the job at hand done and to get it done efficiently.
Thank you, Morgan. Much better said than I could have done. I think that is a sort of common theme in the show. Many of us have come from other paths. Many of us have walked a lot of walks to get to the place we are now. And the one thing I can say about the 4 of us is we are, as Morgan puts it, exactly who we are in this moment. Victor, I wanted to ask you a question because tonight we're going to talk about containment.
Yes.
And this idea of containment, what does that mean to you? Because I have a very specific version of what that means, and I'm going to talk about that, but I'm very interested in your point of view on this. What does that mean to you?
Well, and from my perspective, everything that we deal with is energy, and containment means containing energy. And containing energy can be in many forms. It could be through intention. It could be through physical means. It could be through means of magnetism. If you think about the work that they do with the Grand Hadron Collider over in Bern, Switzerland, that's a huge electromagnetic coil which is used to contain a single beam of electrons that are fired and to create the particles. So that's what containment is to me. It's energy being contained by energy. Yeah,
that's very clear, and thank you for that, Victor, because no matter what the energy is that we're containing, that's pretty much how it's done. The Super Collider is a very good example of that, focused energy and how it's contained. For me, containment is really a thing that I do with demons and occasionally with the disincarnate if necessary, but more so with demons. And it is something that I do where A demon can be contained for any manner of purposes, sometimes for the betterment of the demon at their request, so that they can regroup themselves and provide themselves a better focus of their own energy. But I'm going to talk about techniques about that, but I do want to hear everybody else's ideas about what containment means. Chris, what do you have to add to this?
Well, usually what I do as far as containment goes, it deals basically with demons and like you said, sometimes disincarnate. Find a place for them to go for usage later. I have a couple items that I will carry with me. They're antique items. A couple are heirlooms. And I use some kind of bait to get them into that item. The item is usually protected by me ahead of time by some kind of energy that I either produce myself or from something else. And that I kind of keep them, I would say, in like a warehouse if I would need them again. Like you stated about the demons, if there's an exorcism or I'm getting something out of a house, I've learned from past mistakes, and the most recent was with somebody's pendulum that I told them I would take care of, and within 5 minutes after I touched the damn thing, my back went out of me. So it's like, okay, so we're going to play this game. I try to set up ahead of time, which I should have done then, a place for it to go to other than coming after me. I found that the younger, I found the younger that they are, I don't want to say stupid, but the more inexperienced, where they come after what's ever available. And I should have made, like I said, I should have had my bait and my trap already set up so that they would go into that and I could use them someplace else.
So for you, it's multi-level, and it's also a preventative thing for your own protection during sorcery.
Yes. You have
Morgan?
to protect yourself.
Sorry, Chris. Morgan, what do you think about containment? How have you used it? What is it for you?
Typically for me, what I do is I weave what I would call an energy net to try to entrap whatever entity it is that seems to be causing the problem. And while I have found them before into physical objects, I typically prefer to simply get them out of the environment and then find some way to get a resolution to where I can come to some kind of terms with this entity and say, look, it's not appropriate for you to be in this environment. Is there something else we can do as a compromise? And a lot of times I found that people whose houses or businesses that I've been working in are actually sometimes willing to make a compromise, such as occasionally acknowledging whatever the entity is by leaving a small offering or lighting a candle or some other sort of acknowledgement that just that the entity is there. So containment can be a temporary measure until I can get the being under control, or it can be me simply removing it out of the atmosphere or the environment and then taking it into a place where I can release it, where I feel it will not do any harm, such as usually this is a heavily wooded area or a natural area, and sometimes even a cemetery, depending on whether it's an energy that I feel would be more compatible working around the disincarnate.
You know, for me, containment sometimes has to happen in the most obvious places, and this is interesting to me that you take this into the woods, because on occasion I've buried boxes, I've packed boxes in salt, I've done all manner of things. But sometimes I find that the best way to contain something is to contain it in plain sight. In the studio, which is currently under development, I have contained several disincarnate and a number of demons for various reasons right in plain sight in a way that, aside from one box, which is extraordinarily well labeled, in a way that might be surprising, in glass jars and in one case within the rolls of fabric, because it occurred to me that that particular entity struggled with that medium. So for me, the process is similar in that way, Morgan, as it is a long-term view of what's necessary. I mentioned briefly that holding on to a demon for its own good is something that I've done on occasion. Mostly that sort of situation is brought to me through my attending demons, more so 2, 7, and 9. When a demon is struggling to maintain, by maintain I mean to develop the kind of energy that it needs to grow and to develop, I've been asked on a number of occasions to forcibly contain and to create a situation where that demon can take a moment to know itself in its development. Victor, did you have some thoughts on this?
You know, I just was thinking about some of the classical context for containment. For example, in Islam, they talk about the jinn, and the jinn is the spirit, in Westernized called a genie, and the fact that that energy was contained within a bottle. So they bottled up this spirit, which could be very powerful, until they were ready to use it, and then they popped the cork or removed the covering of the bottle and allowed it to come out. I think to a certain degree in Judaism, the Ark of the Covenant is a containment vessel for energy. And that the power that was generated by the Ark of the Covenant in classical Hebrew literature is supposed to be phenomenal, that it could level armies and so on and so forth. So, again, here are examples of containment. And you and I were having a brief discussion before about the book, the Yiddish demon or malevolent spirit, and very popularized a couple of years ago by the movie The Possession, in which a family purchases this box, which contains a spirit. It was a box that was supposedly passed on by a survivor of the Holocaust. And this whole idea of containment in that, and I think that story was a little exaggerated because I was doing some research on it, and I can't find a lot of references to a containment vessel for the book.
Well, Victor, actually, I have seen 2 of them. One of which has been reported to me to be about 110 years old.
Wow.
And one much more modern at 44 years old at the time of my seeing it, which was about a year and a half ago.
Wow.
I will tell you the one that was over 100 years old was hot to the touch.
Wow.
And I was part of a small group of people invited to move it from one location to another. There is a group of Jews who are in the Orthodox area, and I will not say in which of the particular groups of Orthodox, because there are many. There are the Satmars and the Lubavitch and all of these sort of things. And I, for their own privacy, I won't say which one it is, but they had been raising money for a temple, and they were sort of restoring an old temple in Brooklyn, and came across a box. And they had an association with me already because of work with demons that I had done for them over about a year and a half at that point. And I was called and asked to come and look at this thing, and it looked, it's interesting that film, although over the top, they did a very good job with the box itself. Because there were a number of inscriptions in Hebrew on the box, and there were 2 in Russian, and what looked like an inscription later added in English. But the box was hot to the touch, and we moved the box because they wanted a person there who was not of the faith and who had some skills, and that seems to be not so unusual to be asked to do that. And we moved it in, and it was cement was poured into the container. So it is now housed within the box within cement, but still in the floor of the temple. Because they felt that moving it would cause extraordinary disruption. They knew more about the history of this particular box than I did. And I will tell you that holding it in my hands was an experience I can't even really make sense out of, because I immediately got a fever and all the kinds of things that happens when one experiences this kind of containment. And it was my hands that put it on the floor into this almost sepulcher kind of thing, and then somebody else poured cement into it, and a granite was put over it, and all manner of things went on. But it was quite, I would say, if something, without meaning something, if you can feel malevolence, there it was.
I think
quite intense.
I think it's wonderful and a testament to you and what you do and who you are that a group of Orthodox people would embrace your work and allow you to work with them. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you for that. I'm very grateful for their friendship. They've taught me quite a bit, and I've been whatever help I can be, navigating between their world and this one at the level of the kind of work that I do. I'm very, very grateful. Chris, I wanted to ask you a question. Containment in the kind of sorcery that you do in powwow medicine and this kind of thing, is it more demonic or is it more in the use of the disincarnate, or are people containing each other's energy for other reasons?
Usually what people would come to me for is what they believe to be a demonic possession. So in their mind, it's demonic. You know as well as I do, 9 times out of 10, it's not.
Yeah.
You're going to find out it's a spirit or something like that. So when in reality, what I'm dealing with is mostly disincarnate. What people think it is demonic. I would say out of 25, 3 of them might actually be something that's really demonic. And that's usually within something that is an object or a building. I found it very rarely in a person.
I see.
Especially in this area.
When you do containment, what is your container of choice? I ask that question because part of the reason that we do this show is to offer people at least a baseline, a quick understanding of what the techniques that we use are.
Well, it's the dumbest thing in the world if you really think about it. My grandmother, who taught me a lot of what I know, or my great-grandmother, I should say, she had an old coin bank years ago, and I mean, I'm talking back into the beginning of the century, that it was 8 o'clock coffee that came in this container, and it had a hole in the top. And what you would do is you'd take your coffee out, whatever, and you would put money in there. You could use it as a bank. Well, because it was hers and the work that she did, I also kept that, and that's what I use as my container because it's got her energy and my energy in it. Like I said, that's an heirloom. That's just so I can get it someplace, like Morgan said, leaving it in the woods, putting it in a tree. I've done that already. I found rocks and transferred it into a rock. Sometimes I bring them to the house, and I have, I can sew. So I've made poppets already and put them into that.
So for you, containment is something that you can move from one thing to another. And
yes.
You mentioned the word poppet. For me, I like to put things in wood. And I have a very, very strong association with wood. When I was a funeral director, I had a funeral director's license, which I only used for trade embalming. But I was fascinated by people's choice of wood for caskets. This was something that I thought was very interesting. And some people chose metals if people had that kind of money. But the choice of wood was very interesting for me. And the thing that I found the most interesting is the choice of wood for containments for cremains, when people were cremated. And I looked at that a lot. And I noticed that there were certain types of people who chose the dark woods and people who chose the lighter woods, people who chose to have woods affected by stain and people who chose woods to not so much do that. And I learned quite a bit about what people think contains other things in that experience, and that was quite a number of years into my practice already. So what I understood already in the company with that gave me a very broad gaze about containment. I like to contain things in wooden boxes or in circular things that have wood that you can close. And I like old things that maybe you find in old sewing collections, things that pins used to come in and that sort of thing. But I contain something once and don't move it from that thing to something else until it is, of course, time to release it. when I'm done with the containment, and if I've done a release and the box is empty, that box gets burned and is not used again. But I do continue to collect the ashes from those boxes. So I carry something on me that has the ashes of dozens and dozens of containments and demons, and that has become quite a powerful talisman in and of itself. So that is a little bit about how I do that, or at least the materials that I use. We haven't really gotten to how yet. Morgan, did you have something you wanted to add, a story about your work with containment?
Yeah, definitely. And I also want to bring in a question that one of our listeners has brought up. But the method that I like to use for containment is an old technique that's called the witch's ladder. And I find it works very well for containing recalcitrant spirits. Basically, my technique is to take either 3 or 9 strands of an organic fiber, such as cotton yarn or wool yarn, and you start to braid, and as you're braiding it, you're reciting an incantation. I have a specially crafted one that I use for this particular situation, and you're using it to bind the energy around whatever the entity is that you're dealing with. And that way you can contain it within this and basically trap it and then take it to where you need it. I use this in cases where I feel the entity is not willing to negotiate peaceful settlement with whoever is in the building or whatever the area may be. And that's one of the cases where I would take it out to a natural area. And I will either, if I feel that it is not a horribly malevolent entity, will leave it on a tree, as I think Chris mentioned, or I will put it around a rock, tied to a rock, and throw it in a body of water. And as the witch's ladder dissolves in the natural elements, that basically gives the entity time to calm down and perhaps be released into a less chaotic state for the people and other entities that may be around it. But in our chat room, Darren has brought up a good question. Now, we talked about a sorcery device called the boxes on this show and in several of our intensive Wednesday classes. And Darren wants to know if it's possible to take a demon who's causing problems in the present and put it into a box and then move that box into the past or into another time frame so that it is no longer causing problems for people in the present.
That's a great question. First, let me just comment on what Darren means by the boxes. One of the 4 pillars of the manner of sorcery that I've designed and with the data that I've accumulated and that I teach is a possibility of a piece of work called the boxes. And we use this for all manner of things. We move things back in time, forward in time. We change the outcome. It is one of the most extraordinary and flexible of the pillars, and it allows for all manner of things, from the changing of outcomes to critical healings, all sorts of things. Yes, the answer is yes. The answer is yes, and it's a yes with a little bit more information. Containing something in the boxes requires that one retains the box in real time, all the time, when you're dealing with a demon. If I put a demon in a box and move it back in time, it's a very tangible thing, and because a demon has not had the experience of being a living human being, it does not know how to react by this containment. So keeping an eye on it in that sense is a very useful thing. Moving it into the future is the same. But how do you get it into that box? If it's not a physical box and there's nothing for it to follow, then in order to do that, one has to have a really established understanding of what the boxes are. So if you're going to do that, and I think it's a brilliant idea, I actually at one point moved one of the attending demons into the future for a little bit of time, because she had something that she needed to accomplish in so much as developing her physicality, brought her back to this time with the accumulation of that experience. And this is Sheeg that I'm talking about. Those of you who know my attending demons or know what they are know who Sheeg is. And when she came back, it was one of the times where I developed a better understanding of what the screaming means and how to interpret it. So, yes, this is a very, very good idea, Darren. And when I see you in August, we can do it together, and I can show you what it looks like, if that's any help at all. Victor, what do you think about this? The wonderful thing about this show tonight is that we're talking about the same subject in so many different ways to do it, and I'm so grateful, so grateful that we have the opportunity to do this. what do you think about this physical containment in modern times versus maybe how it was thought of in the past, and how does it fit into your work?
Well, what's really fascinating to me is that every time I've been fortunate enough to be a guest on this program, is that there's been something happening in real time that coincides with what we're talking about. And it brings up a really fascinating subject. On Friday, I'd gotten a call from a dear friend of mine whose mother had transitioned and asked me to do the funeral yesterday, and I did the funeral with her yesterday. And the concept of putting the remains of the disincarnate in a box, in a coffin, and burial, this whole concept of containment, where does that come from, that concept of entombment or interment, where we place the body into the box? I mean, obviously we go back into ancient times, and there's been various forms of entombment and interment throughout history. But what are we actually containing when we put the remains in the box? What is that about?
You know, that's a great question, Victor. And I think that there is a sentimentality, there is an aspect of protection, and there is an aspect of understanding a certain type of finality for the living. Blog Talk Radio has informed us that this is going to be a short show tonight, and that is their countdown clock, because I chose the 11 o'clock hour. So we're really only going to have a half hour tonight. Next week we're going to do 9 o'clock from 9 to 11. I would like to continue this subject. I think that would be a great idea, and Morgan will come in with a segment called The Science of This Sorcery, where Morgan will be talking about science, some sort of scientific evidence that talks about that which we are discussing. So does everyone think that we could do another show and get, from this point, move forward, talk about our methodology and all of that next week?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure.
So that's what we're going to do, and we will be in prime time at 9 o'clock next week. I hope that's good for everyone. I want to go out with the last word, but quickly, Chris, how do they find you?
You can find me at hellsrogue at gmail.com and on Hell's Rogue on my Facebook page.
Morgan?
And you can find me at Morgan St. Knight at hotmail.com and also Morgan St. Knight on Facebook.
Great. Victor?
On Facebook, Victor the Voice Furman.
And that's with an H.
That's with an H, F-U-H-R-M-A-N.
Yes. Everyone knows how that's spelled. And I'm Sorceress Cagliastro, Blood Sorceress, Necromancer in the Hand of Nine. And I would like to say that is at either of the two websites, which is Cagliastro Studio in the Hands of Nine or CagliastroTheIronRing.com. Either one. My email address is sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com. I am grateful, beyond grateful, crazy grateful for this particular group. Amongst us, we probably bring, can't even count the years of experience to this process, and as well as have walked about just every path that's possible. So when you're listening to us on the radio in this group, you know that you're listening to people who have dedicated their lives to this work. And again, sorry about a short show tonight, but it's been great, a wonderful introduction. I want to thank you, Morgan. I am thrilled that you are part of the team. And
thank you.
I am Sorceress. You're very welcome. I'm Sorceress Cagliastro, and I will bid us good evening, and we will see you, or hear you, as it were, at 9 o'clock next Monday. Thank you, and good night.